Welcome to Macintosh Librarian Labs. I wanted to introduce my YouTube audience to my awesome library Annex, or as I like to call it, my Jennifer Memorial NeXT Computer Library Annex. And Jennifer's still with us. I just wanted to thank her for these awesome machines that she gave me for a really awesome price. So what we have here is a NeXT Computer, which is NeXT Computer's first machine that was released in 1988. And over here we have a NeXT Color slab. Right now they're both running pretty old spinning hard drives that are making a lot of noise, and they have trouble booting sometimes. In particular, this NeXT Cube has trouble booting up. And so what I want to do is back up that hard drive and move it to BlueSCSIs. So we're going to be putting BlueSCSIs in both of these machines. So for a little overview of what NeXT is, in case you don't know, and why is it relevant to Apple, NeXT is a company that Steve Jobs founded after he was fired from Apple. And at NeXT, he sought to produce the first 3M machine, where the 3 M's stand for that it has 1 megabyte of memory, it has a megapixel display, and it can operate at 1 MIPS, or 1 million instructions per second. When Steve Jobs rejoined Apple in the late 90s, the Next Step operating system that was the basis of these machines got folded back into the Macintosh architecture, which became the basis of OS X, which we use today. So what is a library annex without some books? And an awesome fan of mine, Kendall Whitehouse, donated some awesome NeXT magazines and books that he had in his collection. And here's an old copy of Next World magazine that he gave to me, which is really awesome. Another really cool thing that he donated was this NeXT Computer brochure, which was an awesome little brochure that shows the front and back of the NeXT Computer. And inside it has really detailed color drawings of the NeXT hardware. Like here's a magneto-optical disc, and talks about the specs and the development of the NeXT Computer. And there's even a little letter in here from Steve Jobs. I think it was signed with AutoPen, but it's still really neat to have in the collection. Essentially what it's saying is, thank you for getting the NeXT system brochure. You can buy the NeXT machine at Businessland. So this is kind of an ad for Businessland, and Businessland was kind of like the CompUSA of the day, and they had a deal where they would sell the NeXT Computer exclusively for NeXT. And this page is really awesome because it shows a really nice detailed image of the motherboard of the NeXT Cube. And Kendall also gave me some awesome books that are up here, like the NeXT Information Kit and some other NeXT brochures that I'll have to show you in a later video. But today, let's go ahead and try to get those BlueSCSIs into these machines and get them booted off of SD cards. So let's go up to the lab and get to soldering. So the BlueSCSI is a device that allows the user to mount hard drive images as files on an SD card. And then the BlueSCSI will then translate these images to a hard drive that the old computer can then read. Essentially, this will help you replace your old spinning hard drive with a SD card. This also gives us the flexibility of having multiple hard drives on one device. By simply changing the files on the BlueSCSI, you're able to mount multiple hard drives or even CD drives on the one little BlueSCSI device. Setting up the BlueSCSI isn't actually very hard. You simply have to rename the files on the SD card to match the SCSI device you want to emulate. In this case, we want to emulate a hard drive, so our file name would be something like this. In this case, I'm using HD for hard disk. To emulate the third device, I'm using 30, where 3 represents the third SCSI ID, and 0 is the logical unit number, but that's always 0. And then I use 512 for the sector size. And I give it a name, which in this case I'm using 2000 megabytes, and then I rename the extension to HDA, and I plop it onto the SD card. And the reason why I use SCSI ID 3 is because this is based on the Control-Alt-Res guide for setting up the SCSI to SD. I just use similar methodology to set it up for the BlueSCSI. And if you want more information on setting up your SCSI to SD on your NeXT computer, check out Sean of ActionRetro, who recently released a video of him using a SCSI to SD in his NeXT Color slab. So I did build 2 BlueSCSIs for this project, and it's actually kind of an intermediate soldering job. It's not too hard. The hardest part is soldering on the SD card readers, which are surface mount soldering. So I had to practice my drag soldering on that. In a future video, I'll have more soldering footage of me building the BlueSCSI. I wanted the core of this video to be about actually setting up the BlueSCSI with the NeXT machines rather than doing the soldering. So the source of these NeXT hard drive images came from winworldpc.com. I used NeXT Step 3.3 HD image with Previous, and Previous is actually an emulator that you can run on your Mac or your PC that will allow you to use the NeXT Step operating system in an emulator. One thing I did do was I made sure that the hard drive image was bootable with Previous, and then I loaded up the hard drive image with games that I had downloaded from the internet. An awesome feature of the Previous emulator is that you're able to not only emulate a 68K NeXT cube or NeXT slab, but you're also able to connect it to a local drive on your computer, much like Basilisk, the emulator that you use for Macintosh. So now we're back up here in the main library, and I brought the NeXT Station Color with me, and I've already done some prep work. The lid is really easy to take off. It's just one screw that's in the back right here, and that just comes right out. And then inside we have a Seagate hard drive. I believe this is a 400 megabyte hard drive. I've already took the liberty of disconnecting it from the bracket, and I've installed these nylon standoffs right here. So let's get our BlueSCSI and let's see how this is going to mount to our NeXT Station Color. I do have this 3D printed case that was on the BlueSCSI wiki. I'm not going to be using this as it's intended to be used because the stock SCSI cable is really short and it's intended to be used with a hard drive that's essentially mounted right here. One solution I thought of is instead of having the BlueSCSI mounted right here and the cable coming to it, I instead would mount the BlueSCSI kind of like this in the case, and that way it'll still have clearance. I don't plan on changing out the SD card very often, so if we ever do, it should be a simple pop out and replace situation. But since the SCSI cable is so short, essentially it would need to come all the way over here if I want to use the actual mounting holes. And also we don't need a power cable to power the BlueSCSI. The SCSI bus provides enough power to run the ST Micro and the BlueSCSI, and it works perfectly without the power cable. So I'm gonna just leave this floating here like that. So I'm just putting a little bit of double-sided tape right here on top of these ports, and I'm fitting the case on it like this. It's very temporary. As you can see, it still wobbles, but this isn't a portable machine by any means. So this will hold it down well enough until I can get a longer SCSI ribbon cable. That way I can actually properly mount it over here. But for now, I think this is totally fine. Okay, so that concludes putting in the BlueSCSI into the NeXT color slabs. So let's try opening up the NeXT cube and replacing the hard drive in that. Oh gosh, this is heavy. There you go. All right, we have the NeXT cube, the back of the cube. Simply to open it up, we just have to remove this back door, which has 4 screws on the back. So let's go ahead and get our screwdriver and open it up. And the hard drive in this cube does have some neat software on it, so I'm going to try and preserve it by using an external drive. But first, let's see if we can get it out. Awesome. For this hard drive, we're going to do something a little different. Since this hard drive works, it just takes a while to boot up. And there is some interesting files on this drive. I believe this used to be owned by someone who worked for NeXT, and they were involved in the educational teaching department, internal teaching, I believe. And so what I want to do is back up this hard drive using DD, which is a Unix command that allows us to do a direct disk copy from one disk to another. So the plan would be to use another tool that I have, which is the external BlueSCSI. So I have this BlueSCSI that allows us to, has a DB25 port, I believe, and that sits on this SCSI port on the back. And that should allow us to boot up this NeXT cube and then use DD to transfer the files onto this solid state drive. Once we do that, we can then use that same exact image that was in here to boot up this NeXT machine using an internal BlueSCSI device. So let's go about and do that. Okay, so I've taken out the chassis of the NeXT cube and I'm going to be replacing the hard drive with the BlueSCSI. I'm a little sick today, so I apologize if I sound a little extra nasally, but I did want to get this video done. And thankfully, it's just a head cold right now, so I should be okay. Let's move the cube out of the way so that we can just work on this main guy right here. Okay, so the main component of the cube is this modular little chassis right here, and it actually has this connector in the front. And that goes into the back plane of the NeXT cube that's inside of the cube chassis. This hard drive that's inside is really big. Let me see if I can show it to you. It's right here. It's a very tall 5¼ inch hard drive. So what we're gonna do is I've already backed up this hard drive. Something I plan on doing in the future is showing how to back up a physical NeXT computer hard drive onto a BlueSCSI and get it booting off the BlueSCSI. I think that's a very important thing to have, especially since these NeXT machines, some of them have software or files that could be interesting to peruse through. This machine in particular was owned by someone that worked at NeXT, and so I want to make sure that I have those files backed up. So I am going to make a separate video talking about how I did that and how you can do it too on your Unix-based machine. So to take out this big hard drive, we need to use just a regular Phillips screwdriver and just attack these 4 screws that are on the side. If you've changed a CD-ROM drive to a CD burner back in the turn of the century, then you'll understand how this works. And it's not hard at all. It does look like this hard drive may have been replaced in the past just because it has Phillips head screws, and the other ones down there have hex bit screws. And also what we're going to be doing to mount the BlueSCSI is using this adapter that I found on Thingiverse that adapts a hard drive slot into, I guess, essentially whatever you want, since it has this hex pattern on it. So we can place the BlueSCSI on it like so, and then attach the SCSI cable to it, and we're good to go. This is a mega big Maxtor hard drive. So 380 megabytes in the palm of my hand. Can you believe it? These things used to be massive. So yeah, let's get this clunker out of here. It's already been backed up, so we don't have to worry about losing our precious files. So that's awesome. I would only take out a hard drive if it's already been wiped before, or if you've done a backup. Since this drive, I want to keep this as original as possible. One thing I did think about doing is maybe mounting the BlueSCSI to the back of the drive and just have it precariously sitting there while this big honkin' guy just sits there unpowered. I might consider doing that, but for now I'm gonna have this on display on one of my shelves back here. But for right now, let's just place it right here. There you go. Next to my stack of MacFX cases that I have not opened yet. Okay, so I have my BlueSCSI. I have the little mounting bracket that I printed out earlier in this Polyterra PLA. I used, of course, my new Bamboo Labs 3D printer. And so what I'm gonna do, it's a little bit of a puzzle. Well, it's not a puzzle, this is actually really simple. So I'm gonna use this 3.5 inch hard drive to a 5.25 inch hard drive down to BlueSCSI. Super simple. BlueSCSI goes in the BlueSCSI adapter. Check. BlueSCSI adapter goes into the 5.25 drive bay adapter. Check. Now I need some screws. I'm going to use these nylon screws to hold everything down, just because I have an abundance of nylon screws. I almost forgot to install the SD card, which is very important. And this already has the backup image of the big hard drives that we just took out. So it should be able to boot up into the exact same OS. I also included a 2 GB blank drive that we can also boot from, and it can serve as a repository for applications. So we have extra space. Okay, so now I'm going to attach the BlueSCSI with some nylon screws and nylon standoffs. Putting this through the bottom like that. And then you just simply cap them off with the bolt. Let's just make sure these are a little more than finger tight. Not that this is going to be rolling around. Cool. And the BlueSCSI just fits in there snugly, like a bug in a rug. Yeah, so there you go. So now we have it ready to mount inside of our cube. Okay, so not very hard. This is the front of the case. So we want to make sure that the SCSI cable is accessible from the back of the case. So let's put it in like this, or the SCSI connectors are in the back. And we just slide it in, then we line up the holes on the side. So I'm gonna use the screws that it came with, which should dig into the plastic. That's the nice thing about 3D printed parts, is that as long as the hole size is right, you don't actually have to have threads in a lot of these parts. If you're using a screw that has large enough threads, it'll self-tap. Cool. Awesome. So now it's mounted inside the chassis. So let's connect this back to the NeXT cube case and put it all in and see if it boots. Okay, let's get this cube up. Place it right here where we can insert this into the backplane. Okay, so this goes in like this. This kind of slides in on these little rails, and it plugs in ever so gently into the backplane. There we go. And that essentially gives us our connection to the motherboard and back to the power supply right here. So let's connect we don't need power anymore. So now that we have the BlueSCSI in place, the only thing that's going to be powering the BlueSCSI is the SCSI cable itself. Okay, so now we have our BlueSCSI mounted inside of the chassis. You can see the SCSI cable going to it right here. The SCSI cable with the little ring on it. And then we have the magneto optical drive, which is right here, attached back to its ribbon cable. So everything's in place and it's good to go. So now we're connected. Let's get on the back panel and see if we can boot. Yep. Okay. So let's take this back downstairs and see if it boots into the BlueSCSI. Okay, so now we're back here in the library annex, and I've been able to boot the NeXT cube to a 1-for-1 copy of the original hard drive on the BlueSCSI. So I'm able to see the old username on this machine, which was Ellen's, and I can see all the old files that were on here that were once on the physical hard drive, which is pretty cool. So I think this is a success. Let's try some applications to see if everything works. Let's go to apps. This one was pretty fun. It's a Halloween little Easter egg app that may have been made by someone internal, or maybe it was passed around in like email back in the day. But let's open up Halloween 92. This is Happy Halloween 92 by Steve Herrick. This is very silly. We have Soft PC, which I think can actually run DOS. Let's see. Cool. Now it's starting up Soft PC. Looks like it's loading up DOS drivers. So I can type DOS shell and press return. MS-DOS, DOS shell. So now we have DOS running on our NeXT cube, which is really cool. And here's a little DOS shell loading up. We have MS-DOS QBasic. So now we have our little DOS machine running inside our NeXT cube. Let's try something fun. It's like one of those tunnel runner games. Let's see. Click start to play a new game. Awesome. Everyone knows that a helicopter's natural environment is in tunnels and caves. Oh. So someone at NeXT had this computer as either their personal machine or their machine at work. So there's also weird fax from the 90s. Remember fax machines? I guess the NeXT could receive faxes using its fax application. And here's a comic, I guess, by Julie Logan and Arthur Howard called The World According to He and She. It's very dated, so to speak. She, 8:45, wake up thin. 8:50, hugs and kisses. He, 10 o'clock, wake up. There's other stuff that happens, and then he eats food, and then he has a bunch of pizza, and he drives his Ferrari with his hot blonde wife. Oh, anyway. Still, little slices like this are fun reasons why have these old hard drives and to back them up and to peruse them gives you a sense of what it was like living back in the day when these computers were the main computers of the time. I guess that was an old meme from back in the day. I guess people used to send memes via fax. Okay, so we were able to get the NeXT Cube working with the BlueSCSI. Let's try to get the NeXT Color Slab working with the BlueSCSI now. So we're able to get the NeXT Color Slab booted onto the BlueSCSI using the SD card. I'm not going to go through all the details and dig through the files of this image, just because it's the same one that you can download from the website that I showed you earlier. But it does work, and it is booting from the BlueSCSI. So I think this is a success. We were able to get both computers running off of BlueSCSIs and replace those old spinning hard drives with SD cards. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Macintosh Librarian Labs. I'm glad that we're able to convert both of these machines over to a solid-state memory using the BlueSCSI. Thanks to modern projects like SCSI to SD and BlueSCSI, we're able to keep these old computers running longer. And we'll be talking in a later episode of how exactly to back up your NeXT hard drive using the DD command and a BlueSCSI. So I'll see you again really soon. Well, thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate you watching. And don't forget, this is brought to you by viewers like you. So thanks to all my Patreons, and thanks to Jennifer for giving me these wonderful computers. All right, see you next time. Bye.